Today's show comes from a bonus huddle. Those are specially curated huddles that we run once a month with experts sharing their insights into topics that are most important to our huddlers. The expert at this particular huddle was Andy Paul, a great friend and one of the leading sales enablement authorities in the country, who recently released this book, Sell Without Selling Out, which I can't recommend enough. Even as a marketer, I think it's just essential that you understand what may become a really new approach to selling. He joined to share his insights on how he sees the sales process being broken and how marketers can play a role. Here's the secret. Selling isn't about increasing lead volume, it's about increasing win rate. And all the things that marketing can do with the insights that they have into buying behavior can make selling more human and more effective. So many insights in this episode. I can't wait for you to hear it. Let me know what you think. Hello, huddlers, and welcome to what we're going to call March Sweetness, as we focus an entire month of huddles on building sweet relationships with sales. Our special guest today is Andy Paul. Andy is the host of a top-rated podcast called Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, and the author of a terrific new book. And I know you know I use that word a lot, but I actually read this book. It's called Sell Without Selling Out on a beach on my phone because the hard copy wasn't available, and found myself highlighting it like almost every chapter, bunch of things on it. Andy is, as I mentioned, an expert on sales, having been a salesperson himself, but I've had the pleasure of knowing him for several years now and really appreciate his thoughtful interviewing style. He actually reads every book of the people he interviews, and he's recorded over 1,000 episodes. And I'm delighted to turn the tables on Andy and throw questions his way. So Andy Paul, welcome.
Thank you, Drew. Thank you very much.
And excited. And we're gonna get to your book, which, as I already mentioned, I did read. And I highly recommend this book to humans of all kinds, not just the species that are known as have sales in their titles. But I want to stay broad for a moment. And we know that sales and marketing need to be connected at the hip, but a lot of times they're not. And I want to channel all of those sales leaders that you've interviewed, and it's so many, who aren't aligned with marketing. And you hear that, you could just tell there's issues that they have. And maybe we could run down what you hear as the typical complaints that a CRO or head of sales might have with marketing. You run them down, and then we'll go through them one at a time and take it from there.
Yeah, I have this might not surprise you, but I have sort of a contrarian view on that whole thing, which is that, sellers are basically looking for marketers to save them from themselves.
Okay.
And
what does that mean?
Well, that they want marketing to help them make up from the fact that on balance, and I think this is a trend that exists in many industries, not just in the software world, is save them from what I consider abnormally low win rates and their inability to win a sufficient percentage of the qualified opportunities they have. In the absence of being able to be more effective selling, they just want more volume of leads. And if they can't get more volume of leads, then they're going to bitch.
And this is something I know that, and I heard you in the interview that you did on your podcast, on your book, you talk about win rates being what is considered an acceptable win rate in many industries versus what you think an acceptable win rate is. Can you just talk about that? Because that's what it comes down to, right?
Right. It varies obviously by industry, but even within industries, I mean, oftentimes in the SaaS world, and I know firsthand experience working with a number of SaaS companies, they find an acceptable win rate of their most qualified opportunities at the start of a period. They might win 20% or 25% of those. And that's considered pretty typical.
20%, so 1 out of 5. So that would be from a pipeline, and we talk about this in huddles a lot. So what do you have to, what's your remit? And that might be 3X or 5X per sales rep. So the premise right here is if you deliver 5X, we'll be able to close 1 in 5 and we'll be able to.
Well, yeah, here's a rule of thumb to think about. Your win rate will be the reciprocal of your pipeline coverage requirement.
Okay, you got to explain that to me.
Well, if you have a 5X pipeline coverage requirement, your win rate is most likely going to be 20%, 1 of every 5.
Oh, because if they only had 1 lead, they'd have to close it.
Yeah. And if you find that if you've got a 9x coverage, as some companies do, or 7x, as their win rates are going to drop below 20%. And I would ask the question of anybody who says, well, hey, we've achieved product market fit. Can you really say that you've achieved product market fit if you can only win 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 4 of your most qualified opportunities?
It's interesting because this thing got switched really fast to sales not being able to do their jobs. And I know that a lot of CMOs would like to say, well, sales isn't very good at what they do because they only close 1 in 5. But I want to go, and I think if we step back to your first statement, sellers are looking for marketing to save themselves from themselves. So in other words, if marketing was just better, then sales would be easier. Is that sort of the framework for this?
No, I mean, I think that if you're in that situation where you have such low win rates, is somewhere there's a failure along the line, right? It could be failure to appropriately qualify the prospect. They just may not be a fit, right? Could be a failure to do appropriate discovery, as I talk about in my book, is to really understand what's most important to the buyer. Or what is, I think, happening most frequently is that the experience the sellers are creating for the buyer in their buying journey is one that does not either inspire or activate the interest sufficiently of the buyer to make a decision to buy from them.
So the sales process that the most have, 1 in 5 or 1 in 9 or whatever it is flawed or broken or something. Now I'm thinking about the CMO for a moment, and I know that they're not going to want to be able to, they can't go to their sales guy and say, dude, you suck.
Right.
That's pretty certain. You can't build a relationship this way. And so I'm wondering, as we think about this problem, which is inherent, as you're describing it, there's some failures in the sales process. Part of it, I guess, would be helping them to identify it. But what would you have the marketers here do? They're putting the leads into the pipeline, and they're even sales qualified leads or their opportunities. They're real. They're not just stopping at marketing qualified leads. What would you have them do or know or understand? And those are a lot of different verbs. So let's get into this from, again, this broad level, and then we'll talk about how to fix sales.
I think it starts from understanding why the buyers buy from the seller, right? We know from research from Challenger and Gartner and Forrester that the majority of the purchase decision is based on the buyer's assessment of their interaction with the seller, more so than the product that they're buying or the company they're buying it from. So you really need to understand and be able to quantify to some degree what is that experience buyers are having with your sellers. This is different than a win-loss analysis where you're talking about pricing and product and features. This has to do with that experience dealing with the sellers. And the fact is, most organizations have no knowledge of what the buyer's perception of that is. And it's decisive in the decision they ultimately make. And so I think the one thing marketing can help with is say, yeah, let's start looking at that, right? When I talk to sales leaders and they talk about, hey, we need to hire up some people, and these are the skills and attributes we need. And I'll say, well, have you ever asked your buyer what they need from your sellers, what they need your sellers to be, right? Do they need to be an extrovert? Do they need to be a closer? Do they need to be all these attributes that sales leaders typically put on their job descriptions? And the fact is, no. What buyers need is what I summarize. They need curious, open-minded problem solvers. But I think marketing could help sales by saying, yeah, we're going to go out, we're going to talk to our buyers on a regular basis and create sort of like an NPS equivalent for how the buyers experience the sales process as their buying journey, right? If we're completely unmindful of that, how can we make decisions about how to improve our processes, or sometimes even how the opportunities we're targeting?
Well, I'm going to put a big punctuation point on that, because this is sort of a different way of thinking about, so a buyer NPS, just for focusing on that for a second, because that's it. I don't know too many companies. If you do this at your company, put it in chat, but I don't think there are that many who actually, in a sense, you're kind of rating that salesperson and the experience that they're delivering.
Yeah, as I like to say, it is personal. It's not personal as in you're a bad person, but it's personal as the buyer's making a judgment about you and the value you brought to them to help them make their decision. And so, there are very few companies that do that. There's a company out of Austria, Vienna, called Alinea Partners, like the famous restaurant in Chicago, Alinea. run by a woman named Leanne Hobson. Actually, if everyone wants to tune into my podcast, Leanne's actually on my podcast, where we talk about this, because I read about the company and I thought, this is fascinating. This is what they do. They work with companies like Microsoft and others to be able to sort of assess and quantify what that buying experience is with sellers.
It's not like the CMOs here don't talk to customers. They talk to customers all the time, but when they're doing it, what they're listening for is messaging and an insight that they can use to create campaigns or to get case histories and find ways of, if you will, using this customer to get another customer based on that. But they're not generally trained to assess a sales experience.
Yeah, or a buying experience is what I call
it. Or a buying
so,
experience,
right. So yeah, so I think that's a function marketing could take on, and it's necessary.
And what are some of the questions and things? What do we include in this? Let's write this thing right here.
Why not? I should bring the Leanne Hobson on to talk about it. You can start with, just sort of identifying what, this larger premise. What value did you get from the sellers, right? So we know that from various surveys, and I have this in my book, is 80% of C-level decision makers say they see no value in their interactions with sellers. That's a pretty significant amount, right? Start with that. We want to dig down on that, right? What was missing? Why wasn't there value in this interaction? What were you expecting that you weren't getting? What do you need from the sellers at various points in time? Because I think the other thing that goes along with this is that we're completely misaligned from a selling standpoint with the buyer and their journey, right? We still map out the sales journey as these linear stage-based processes that fit neatly into our CRM system, and they have no relevance whatsoever to what the buyer is going through.
We've seen the Gartner spaghetti chart.
Right, the spaghetti chart, right. So at the heart, there's these 4 jobs that need to be accomplished. I would hope that what we could do through assessing how the buyers experience this is we start getting data to start aligning this, right? So when we have these various touch points, and we understand the expectations the buyers have from sellers at those touch points, is that we can say, okay, we can do a better job. And so in the book, I'd simplify it for people to make it easier to sort of understand that, is to say, what is value in the context of a buyer? And what I argue, and I believe, is that value is, in the sales process, value is progress. So as a result of interacting with the seller, did I make progress toward making a decision? And that sort of becomes the benchmark for every interaction you have with a buyer. Was I able to enable the buyer to make progress toward making a decision? That's another area I think, as we identify with these touch points and the lack of value that they receive from them, then marketing can work with sales to say, how can we better enable the sellers at these points in time to be able to help the buyer make progress?
So I want to go back to that number of 80%. Say, are these people who actually purchased? So these are people at the end of the thing who purchased, or this is in general of all buying experiences, B2B buying experiences?
This was, I believe it was a Gartner study that was done. I have the reference in my book. I forget the exact number.
And value is progress. So to me, that gets us to sales enablement language and thinking about the tools that you can do, if it's the ROI calculator or some of these other things. You're shaking your head. What are we talking about when we say helping them make progress?
Yeah. So think about the basic bargain that buyers strike with a seller. I'm going to invest some of my time and attention in you. What am I going to earn in return for that investment? It's that simple. So every time you interact with the buyer, they're investing time and attention in you. They have to earn a return on that investment. A lot of what they want, I believe, and my experience has shown, is that they want the help of a sales organization, a selling organization, to think more deeply and broadly about the problems they're trying to solve, and more deeply and broadly about the outcomes they potentially can achieve. And so I think that again, is another area where sales needs help, because we can't, there's a thin strata of really good salespeople that can sort of do those things independently, but then there's the rest that are engaged in that. So let's take aside the top 5% maybe that are capable of having those discussions, have the insight and the experience, and have learned and brought it all together. But then we've got the rest of the 95% of sellers that need help. And I think that help comes in part from marketing that can help them really understand how their existing customers are getting value from the products that they bought from you, and products and services. And especially, I think a question that doesn't get asked enough when we do case studies and so on is, my experience has shown over 40 plus years at this point, is that in almost every instance, when I've sold something, the buyer's deriving some value from it that they didn't anticipate when they made their purchase decision. There's some feature or function or use case that's developed through their use of it that they didn't anticipate. Understanding those those things, those become the valuable insights for sellers as they start to engage with buyers. Because then in my book, I talk about 6 different types of questions. You ask one of those being an insight question. And the insight question is you're going to ask a buyer something about their business that you could reasonably expect them to know, but possibly they don't. So it becomes this great conversation trigger for beginning to explore with the buyer what the problems are and what they possibly hope to achieve.
Okay, that's a lot to unpack. I'm going to get through some of those, but I want to just take a quick detour back. Mm-hmm. So if 80% of the buying experiences suck and in sort of no value determined, and we already have this trend towards self-serve because we're all pretty satisfied with the self-serve thing. We go to Amazon, we buy, we hit the button, we do our research, and we're done. Is part of this just doing a better job of trying to self-serve and anticipate this? And so that when you finally do have a sales conversation, you can really get to value add. Is that sort of a concurrent solution?
I'm little skeptical of the research that's come out that says, buyers don't want to talk to sellers and so on, because maybe over the course of commerce and human history, let's say 6,000 years, buyers never wanted to talk to a seller. I never had a buyer wake up in the morning and said, gee, I wish Andy calls me today. No, I think what buyers still have the same imperative, which is they get to a certain point, they need to talk to salespeople. If the salespeople can add value to them, right? If the salespeople are better than looking at a website or downloading a piece of content, which is a pretty low bar, right? And plus there's the element of risk associated with purchase decisions that carry risk. People want to validate decisions with talking to humans. I believe that the way to think about it is that, and I think self-aware organizations know this, is, this whole idea of sort of strong ties and weak ties. The research on that is, people work together in an organization, they develop these strong ties. And what the research has shown is that basically they close themselves off to outside input. So the information they know is called redundant information. And so they really need people with weak ties to the organization, as in salespeople, to come in and help provide a different perspective about the problems they're trying to solve. And so I believe self-aware buying organizations know this intuitively, right? We need an outside perspective on what we're trying to do. That then becomes the opportunity for them to engage with sellers. If we continue down sort of the path I think we are on, we're creating an impetus for buyers to say, how much more of this can I do on my own? Because I'm getting no value from talking to these salespeople. We as sellers can be better, which is what I argue in the book. And I think there's a path to do it, but we're not helping ourselves right now. Take this case where we have 7x, even 5x or 7x pipeline coverage requirements. You can't expect sellers to devote sufficient attention to all the deals in the appropriate way in order to bring them across the finish line to help the buyer make a decision. What we'd end up with this scenario is where we've got so much deal flow in many cases coming through the funnel that instead of selling, we're basically playing the odds. We know that if we just do a minimally good job, we're going to close a certain percentage of those. And I've had this conversation with CROs of public companies where talk to them about their growth strategy, and there's no focus at all on improving sales effectiveness. It's all about, we're pretty good at getting that demand gen and lead gen and getting opportunities into the top of the funnel. We're going to invest heavily in that because we're good at it. We think we can get better. And we know if we just close this low percentage of it, we'll still be able to grow and hit our targets. Someday the party ends though with that. No one's selling in markets with infinite TAM that enable you to do that forever.
Okay. I have many questions that are going through my mind here because there's a lot.
Not going the way you wanted?
Yeah, no, it's going great. And it's so fascinating. I'm just sort of channeling and I want to go through. We've got a lot of questions in chat here. One question is the training of the sales organization and the role that marketing plays in that. Because in theory, in many ways, marketing was the repository of all great insights into the customer. Whether or not that exists universally or not, that was always a core strength of the CMO. Here's the other thing. If most of these companies have a 5x pipeline, and you're arguing that's bad, most of the CMOs have come to live with that, which means they're not providing insights today that are helping the CROs close at a higher rate. Did I connect dots that are connectable here?
Possibly, yeah. In some cases, I believe that's the case. Yes.
Okay, so then we can then go to this question of if CMOs aren't delivering the insights the salespeople can use to close at a higher rate. What do they need to do to get those insights? What are the things they should be thinking about? Maybe we need to go through the 6 different questions. Do they need to go on more sales calls? Are they listening into Gong? I mean, what is it that they need to do to make sure that they, have this understanding so that they can deliver the insights that will get us to 3x, which feels like 1 and 3 should be a reasonable thing, because then you can put more energy into it, right? More time, deliver more value.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. It really sort of starts with, and marketing has some role in this. I don't know, is how the perspective we give sellers what their job is. And I think marketing does help with this somewhat. And so, because this gets into a topic you want to talk later about persuasion versus influence, is that if you ask most sellers, which I've done in public speaking and so on, ask people to raise their hands, we do anecdotal surveys, but the vast majority of sellers think their job is to go out and persuade a buyer to buy their product. And I believe the job of a seller is to go out and listen to the buyer, to understand what's the most important things to the buyer in terms of the challenges they face and the outcomes they want to achieve, and then help them get that. Now, those are 2 different ways of looking at the world. One is you're a target and my job is to make you buy what I'm selling. So the other one is, let's really understand what's important to you and how can we help you achieve that?
You use the word influence instead of persuade. Keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, I think marketing can help in that degree as well. As we have to change this perspective, the operating perspective that most sellers have, most sales leaders have, is think that the buyer is a target. Selling something we do at someone is something we do to someone, not something we do with them. And I speak from the experience of selling everything from $2,000 computer systems to $150 million communication systems. It works the same in all instances. If you collaborate with the buyer to help them reach a decision, then that's much more effective, and it results in shorter decision cycles and higher win rates.
It sounds so easy.
Well, it's not. It's simple, not easy.
Okay, it's simple, not easy. So, there's so many good chapters, and just the titles alone in your book. Chapter 5 is Death to Salesy. Why does salesy need to die, and how can marketers help here?
Yeah. So salesy is those legacy, obsolete sales behaviors that buyers hate, that are legendary. The self-interested, pushy, persuasive, sleazy sales behaviors as they're perceived by the buyers. I find it interesting that we know these things don't work. They've never worked. They don't have any value for the buyer. They have no value for us as sellers. So why don't we just stop? We could stop today. We could go cold turkey today with those salesy behaviors, and we'd be no worse off than we are today. Getting back to the persuasion thing, as I reference in the book, this book by Jonah Berger, The Catalyst, a professor from Wharton, a book about persuasion, and had him on my show. And we didn't agree about everything that we talked about, but he has this research sites in the book that shows that as humans, we universally resist being persuaded. It's like we know this. And yet we fashion so much of our sales training and sales theology, if you will, around this idea of persuading people to do something. And it's just sort of counterproductive in most instances. Back to the idea about the salesy, just to wrap that up, is we're teaching people to be salesy. And the story, it's in the book, but it's one I love to use is the one question a buyer will never ask you, which is, hey, Drew, love your product, but I just don't think I can buy from you because you're not salesy enough. Could you be more salesy?
Yeah, I could. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, right. It just has no value for anybody in the equation. And yet it really dominates sort of the sales culture these days.
Yeah. I mean, anytime we talk about this, I just immediately go to the movie Used Cars. And I just think of the scene where the competition is who can sell it the fastest. And the one, I think it's Kurt Russell, goes up and says, as someone has just touched the car, arrived in the lot, and says, so can we write it up? That's not what we're doing here. I feel like part of this interesting conversation is the CRO will have to say, oh, 5X isn't good enough. Oh, we should be going for 3X. They're going to have to identify and have to agree with the CMO, because the CMO can probably find that insight. They're all trained. I mean, they're really good at finding insights that will help and think about this a little bit more. But at some point, the CRO has to say, you're right, it's a problem.
You're right. That is the problem. In so many instances, it's the playbook that's become sort of the institutionalized playbook through, certainly in the software world, because this is how we do things. So if you're a CRO coming into a new situation and you're thinking about job longevity in any sense of the word, are you going to take a risk to try to change things up? Or you just say, well, I'm just going to try to do better at the crap we're doing, as opposed to trying to really transform things. Because what leeway do they have? Yeah, take somebody with some courage to go back to the board and CEO and say, yeah, I know you just brought me on, but we're going to change things up. We're going to have a down quarter, maybe two, but then the future is going to be much brighter. And I've seen and come across very few CROs that are willing to have those conversations.
Interesting. In some ways, let's face it, if the CMO can get the salespeople to close at a higher rate,
can help them to do that. Yes.
It can help them if they can do that. That opens up a lot of other things, right?
Oh yeah.
And it creates all sorts of opportunities to put more money in sort of retention activities, more money in upselling and cross-selling, more money in other ways of improving the experience, or just like brand or other things that would, again, sure, in theory, help close at a higher rate. So the interest is there to do that. That I don't see that as happening as the request. I don't think CMOs are being told that.
No,
it's you got to deliver 5x. Just get 5x. We'll close from there. We'll take it from here.
We'll take it from here.
But I will say, in fairness, there's a lot of Brent Adamson believers who are big on buyer enablement and are doing and thinking about it all the way through, and also look at close rates and speed to close. One of the CMOs been on this call. We've had an in-depth conversation about how they've worked to speed up the sales cycle, which means if they're speeding up the sales cycle, they must be doing some things that you're describing. I think we can step back and make this really interesting in the sense that all of us are doing sales one way or another.
Right.
Right. And one of the sales jobs that the assignment now for all the CMOs here will be to sell their CRO on, or to influence their CRO on creating more value throughout the sales process. So in your book, you have a 4 points framework, which I'm a fan of, because
the 4 pillars of selling in.
It's the 4 pillars of selling in. Now the book is called Sell Without Selling Out, and yes, the goal is to be selling in, not selling out. Right. So let's take these 4 pillars. We've got connection, curiosity, understanding, and generosity.
Right.
And we're all in our role as salespeople, as influencers, are going to take these 4 characteristics. Let's talk about connection first. And what do you mean by that? And what are we going to learn to do?
Sure. Well, and just as a sort of step back in framework, actually, when I was starting to write this book, it was originally sort of framed as a little bit bigger book, talking about, using these same frameworks in collaboration within the workplace, right? I don't know if anybody's read Ann Latham's book, The Power of Clarity. Great book talking about collaboration and productivity within the workplace. But she takes what we have known as knowledge workers and said, we need to reframe that. Actually, they're all interaction workers, because we get our job done by interacting with other people and through other people. So originally I was sort of thinking it's a broader framework, but we decided to leave that for later. We'll come back to that. But in the meantime, it's about sales. So the 4 pillars. So connection is first pillar. In order to earn the right to influence the thinking of someone else, is you have to earn a certain level of trust and credibility with that person. That is the first pillar, right? Is how do I demonstrate that I'm trustworthy, that I have credibility, that we just have this basic human connection, that I'm interested in you and what you're interested in. And when you do that, then you look at it from a sales perspective, also a collaborative perspective, is people, let's say they start giving you permission to have an influence over them.
And these connections, the word is fairly straightforward, but do you have an example, again, where I'm now thinking of a CMO trying to build a stronger connection with their salesperson specifically to influence them to change the way they sell?
Yeah. And so it's pretty well known that, one of the keys to building trust is some level of vulnerability, making yourself vulnerable, not in the emotional, hey, I'm going to bare my soul to you type vulnerability, but in the context of, I'm going to take a little bit of a risk. And so when you're dealing with someone, I created another 4-point framework that you didn't mention, a second one called MICE, M-I-C-E. And these are 4-point framework for building trust with someone. And the M stands for motivations. Are your motivations transparent when you're dealing with someone? This is the key thing, right? Is that just on the surface, I'm completely transparent why I'm talking to you, what my objective is, what I'm trying to achieve. The I is integrity, meaning is having said, this is what being transparent, what my motivations are. do my actions align with my words, right? Or the famous Emerson statement, yeah, what you do speaks so loudly, I cannot hear what you say. So actions speak louder than words. The C stands for credibility. You have established a baseline of credibility around the topic you're discussing or interacting on. And the E is execution, is do you live up to your commitments? So motivations, integrity, credibility, execution. And so it's, as I said, a simple framework for saying, yeah, when dealing with someone and you're trying to do that with your counterparts, we'll broaden it as we get a little bit into the other pillars, but this is just sort of a baseline, right? And so if you can sort of meet this, is then they open themselves up to say, okay, I want to learn more.
Okay. Curiosity.
Curiosity. Well, I mean, and just to draw sort of broader contrast with this whole selling out is, selling out, as talked about in the book, those are learned behaviors. No one comes out of pops out as an infant, pushy, persuasive, sleazy, whatever, maybe a little demanding, but not pushy. Whereas we talk about connection, curiosity, understand, generosity, these are innate human behaviors. We are wired to want to connect to other people. We are wired to be curious. It's our curiosity that enables us to navigate the world around us. In this instance, though, we're talking about using curiosity to begin the process of understanding what's most important to someone else. In the book, I talk about 6 different types of questions, category questions of questions, excuse me. We talked about the insight question before. My favorites I talk about in the book is what I call an impact question. And it's just a way to get people to start thinking in real terms about what's the impact of making a decision in real terms. Start quantifying, and not necessarily in dollars and cents because you're dealing with a colleague, but what is the impact on you? Because everything that you're going to ask somebody to do has an impact on them. And you to really understand what's important to them, you need to understand what these impacts are. The other sort of just important thing about curiosity is that the way you make yourself interesting to another person is to be interested in them. And just sort of basic law, human nature.
What you are talking about in your book is being a human being. And that, that there's this notion when you become sales, you become a salesperson. It's like an alter ego. It's this character that you're playing. I just think it's so interesting. And I'm wondering if salespeople who've been doing this a long time, do you find that they sort of say, are you serious?
Not so much. It's actually the questions you get more tend to be from sort of management level people saying, well, we've got a number to hit. How can we be human if we've got a number to hit? And I'm like, well, actually, this is how you hit your number more reliably and predictably is by being a human, because you can actually help the customer come to a decision point more quickly than if you're just pushing. Yeah, they have a hard time getting, because that's, they think you have to, they bought into the act that they think you have to be, and you don't.
Well, it's funny because in many ways, marketing could benefit from being more human too, in terms of the way it communicates out into the world, particularly when it gets into speeds and feeds and not
right.
into benefits and insights. So there is an opportunity, equal opportunity for increased humanity, but it goes back to a question earlier and a question of rational versus emotional and how sales are. Do you have a perspective on, is the buying decision ultimately more rational or emotional, and what role does sales play in that?
Yeah, so I talk about that at the end of the book. This is, sort of, again, a little bit contrarian, I think, but it's based on hard science, is that at the end of the day, buyers make a pretty rational decision. So the background is that people familiar with Herbert Simon, Nobel Prize winning economist, done a bunch of research on what he called the theory of bounded rationality. And he said that when people make decisions, everybody has 3 constraints: limited time, limited information, limited understanding. And therefore, when they're out looking to make a decision about something, people typically will research their alternatives until they find a solution that satisfies their requirements and suffices to meet their goals. And he created this new word called satisfice. Now, that was on one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum was he called maximizers. Maximizers are people that will evaluate every single alternative to ensure themselves that they made the absolute best choice. What Simon found is that what satisficers did is make what we call the good enough decision. And the first time this happened to me in my career is like, I was just confused. I was some big system to this telecom company in Europe. like about 2 months before I thought I was going to get the order, I got the order. And what happens is buyers say, look, the differences between products, especially these days, the differences between products are so slim. The marginal gain we'll get from investing more of our time to keep investing in evaluating alternatives just isn't there. This is good enough. Boom. And so when you think about how you then structure your selling process, these pillars start becoming very important, because if you're the first to be able to connect with the buyer and build trust, then you'll be the first to earn the right to influence their decisions. You'll be the first to reach a level of understanding about what's most important to them. You'll be the first to help shape this vision of success for them, of what success will look like if they've invested in using your product and service, which Forrester found in a study about 10 years ago, that if you are the vendor that's first to be able to do that, your odds of winning a deal stand at 65%. There's a study they did on IT buyers, I said roughly about 10 years ago. Being focused on making a connection, building trust, demonstrating trustworthiness, demonstrating and deploying your curiosity, reaching this level of understanding, doing these things, if you're the first to get there, huge benefits from you from a sales perspective in terms of your odds of winning a deal. And this becomes much more powerful than even the product and service you're selling. And I relate stories in the book. I worked for startups for a number of years, selling large, complex communication systems, competing against the biggest tech companies of the day, big defense systems integrators, and so on. And we won deal after deal because the buyer would say to us, "You're the only ones that made us feel understood."
You're
like
the
you really,
only ones that made us feel understood.
Yep.
There it is. That's all you got to do.
Yeah, that's all you got to do.
That's all you got to do. Now,
Yeah.
and again, so we're running out of time here, and I picked up a lot here, which is so interesting in all of this, which is there's a landmine out there, which is that sales is broken. Sales perspective is broken, is a little bit broken.
Hmm.
And there is a way for you to diffuse the landmine in a way that is good for you, really good for you, the CMO. Part of it is helping them develop an approach to sales that will increase the close rate, which means either you need fewer people, which is part one of this thing, you may need fewer people, or you grow faster. But getting there is going to take some work and some mutual understanding and some influence a lot to do it. And a recognition somehow or other, the CRO has to say, the way I've been doing it is broken. So it's not an easy conversation, but hopefully a lot of food for thought. As you think about CMOs leaving this call, is there anything else that you would like them to leave with to help them sort of inspire a new approach to sales beyond some of the things that we've already talked about?
Yeah, I think it's just a discussion that needs to be had. And we're just in sort of a vicious circle, I think, in so many companies, because they think that this is a playbook that we have to implement. And the playbook is fundamentally broken. And it works for companies who hit a moment in time that, yeah, they do have that sort of magical moment. They're in the right place at the right time. What people have done is sort of attributed those companies' success to their sales process, as opposed to the fact that it's the right product for the right market at the right time. So this is a hard thing to break, but I think it starts with conversations at the executive level to say, look, we need to refashion what we're doing, right? That our path to growth doesn't have to come from just doing more of what we've been doing, but doing better of what we're doing. Because if companies could take win rates from 20s one year to 30 the next year, 35 the year after, and so on, trust me, it's a faster, more profitable route to growth than what they're currently doing.
More fun. I mean,
and more fun
to fail.
Well, and the thing is, that's another point. I know it's not the theme for here today, but yeah, I mean, there was a study that came out from uncrushed.org toward the tail end of last year about the mental well-being of salespeople. And not good. The picture wasn't pretty, but a lot of it is because they're all in these environments where what's considered acceptable is not good.
Yeah, it's 80% failure rate.
Right. I mean, and so if practice makes perfect, you're only closing 1 out of every 4 or 1 or 5 of your deals, what are we training our sellers to do? We're training them to lose.
And it's so interesting. And I imagine, because this is would be a huge leap for folks, what I'm thinking about is, in theory, this is a testable proposition. You could create a skunk works of salespeople with your CRO to say, this group is going to try a different approach. And their goal is to get from whatever, if we're 5x today, or I mean, 1 in 5, we're going to get to 1 in 4. And here's how we're going to do it. And you could actually create a test with a partner who does a CRO. All right. Well, we're out of time, but Andy, Paul, thank you for joining us. Where can people find you?
So Sell Without Selling Out,
Right.
available, #1 new release in multiple categories, bestseller already on Amazon after a week. It's the moment for the book. Clearly there's a willing audience. People want to say, look, help us change what we're doing. So yeah, Amazon, wherever you want to buy it. People want to follow me on LinkedIn, pretty active on there. My podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, 1,036 episodes. And go to andypaul.com. We have a little assessment there, a little fun assessment. You can decide, you can determine how salesy you are.
Okay.
All
right.
Not hugely scientific, but it is fun.
So thank you, by the way.